Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Bree Hogue, and I'm the store manager of Powell's Books here in Portland, Oregon. This evening, we are very honored to welcome André Aciman and Jonathan Burnham. André is the best-selling author of Find Me, Eight White Nights, Call Me by Your Name, Out of Egypt, False Papers, Alibis, Harvard Square, and Enigma Variations. He's the editor of the Proust Project and teaches comparative literature at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and lives in Manhattan. In his new book, Homo Irrealis, Aciman returns to the essay form with a collection of thoughts on time, the creative mind, and the great lives and works, and explores what the present tense means to artists who cannot grasp the here and now. Irrealis is not about the present or the past or the future, but about what might have been but never was, but could still, in theory, still happen. Tonight, he is joined in conversation by Jonathan Burnham. Burnham is the president and publisher of the Harper Division at HarperCollins. A London native, Burnham graduated from Oxford University, and he is currently on the board of senior conservators at the New York Public Library and a faculty member at New York University. Tonight's event will include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you would like to ask André a question. You can support André Aciman and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his new book from powells.com. André, Jonathan, it is such a pleasure to welcome you both this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you so much. So Andre, congratulations. I'm going to hold up the book so people can see it. This is a galley of your book. Congratulations. Today is your actual publication date. So
yes, it is, yes.
It's a big day. I just want to say what a deep pleasure it has been to spend the last week reading this collection of essays. Just to describe the book briefly, it's really a series of sort of connected meditations on artists, books, places, love, desire, but above all, time. I think time is at the very center of the book's thinking. And every theme seems to sort of like eventually come back to the idea of past, present, future, and the way time kind of folds in on itself. I'd like to talk first, though, before we talk about the themes of the book, about the form of the book. As a publisher, I see many collections of essays, and they're often brilliant, but often, rag bags. They're collections of previously published pieces that are pulled together across the years, and they're excellent compilations. This book felt very different to me, and I was curious about the background to it. I did a bit of sleuthing. I found one piece that was previously published in the New Yorker, maybe partially, but to me, and this is one of the finest things about this book, it read as a completely coherent piece of prose, interweaving themes, reflecting back on itself, as if it had been purposefully structured in this way so that the reader was led through the various essays in a very particular way. So I wanted to ask you how you conceived of it and whether this was written, as it were, from the ground up.
Well, it's two things, actually. One was I started an essay in my previous book, almost 10 years ago, in which I was trying to understand what is this dimension that I think all of us live in, and we have no name for it. So we call it, in fact, the past, the present, and the future. Whereas I think that most of us live in this very sort of cloudy and nebulous dimension, which is basically not even the past, but the might have been, to call it that name. And I wrote that essay 10 years ago. And then when I started the collection here, I wasn't sure it was going to be coherent about the same subject. But after writing the first essay on Éric Rohmer, who's my favorite director, I said, I'm going to write 2 more essays on 2 of my favorite films. And they are connected, though, as I say in the preface, they're connected, but I don't want to force the connection either. So I wanted to give my reading, however frivolous it can be, however erroneous sometimes it is, sometimes intentionally mistaken, because I wanted to delve into this dimension through the prism of other writers and other composers and movie directors and all kinds, and especially Freud. So it was, I realized soon enough that I had a subject, but I couldn't address it myself directly. I had to do it through the bias of other writers and other thinkers.
So again, before we get on to the themes, I'd like to talk about how you write an essay. And it sounds very simple, but what is the springboard for each individual piece? Is it the thought of is it Freud, Sebald, Proust, or is it the idea behind that comes through?
Actually, it's a good question. It's usually a sentence. And everything I write is usually starts with a sentence that has absolutely no direction, none. It may not even yield anything at all, but I just feel that, okay, this sentence about Éric Rohmer or about Beethoven, I want to pursue it. I don't know where I'm going. I never know where I'm going to go with an essay. And I like that because it makes life more difficult. If I knew what the essay was about, then I'd have an outline in my head. But as I like to say, you write in order to discover the outline. You don't write because you already have an outline. That's not real creative writing. It's something else. It's a form of you're producing an essay because you already know what it is. I never, and which means that sometimes you're in the middle of the essay and you have no idea where you're going to go. And that makes it quite laborious. It's torture. And maybe I like to torture myself, but I think most writers like to torture themselves because they can find ways of absolving themselves and expiating whatever it is that they did wrong by hiding all the tracks.
Yeah, it may be torture, but it's not torture for the reader. It's actually we see you setting yourself puzzles and then trying to puzzle your way out of them as sort of in real time in the essays, which is a wonderful experience. So let's talk about the sort of, well, let's begin with the title, which effectively delineates the sort of central problem of the book, the problem the book is wrestling with, which is the idea of I'm not sure of exactly the right pronunciation. Is it Irrealis?
Irrealis, yes. And
the
I've asked a couple of linguists, not many, but very important linguists, what is the Irrealis mood? And they didn't even know the word. So you're talking about a term that's very unfamiliar, but here it is. I mean, as I like to claim, and I will never tire of claiming this, we all live in that dimension. This is where all our fantasies go. This is where our inner life sort of travels every single day, every hour. We're in the, what will I do tomorrow? What will I do? What should I have done? Why didn't I do this? Let me replay it. It's all this dimension that this is what brain is supposed to do. A brain is not just logged into the present tense, the way some people claim, and I love when they claim this, I live in the present tense. You know, that's a lot of baloney. They don't. They're full of regrets, remorses, rehearsals, rituals, whatever you want to call them. These are all sort of things that play with time. We play with time because, as I like to say in the book, time couldn't give a damn about what we think of time. It just goes on if it even exists. Some people say that time doesn't exist. It's just our own invention. Think of that. That sort of damages me. But it's there. So Irrealis is this time zone that has not happened and may never happen. Though here we are, poor mortals that we are. We're begging for it to happen. But then we don't want it to happen, really. But then, no, I really want it to happen. No, you don't. And it's this inner conflict that we live with, and that no shrink is ever going to solve for us.
Well, no, you've put your finger on the sort of central dilemma here. So for the audience, the Irrealis which, as you say, is not even listed in the dictionary, but
No, not.
can be found, is a grammatical mode,
Yes.
which covers many sort of conditional tenses, future possibility tenses. In other words, if I were a rich man,
Yes.
fill in the rest.
Yes.
Things that might happen, but probably will not happen, as this is the way you express it. And therefore they're kind of endlessly projecting forward and back without ever really taking stock of the present. Is that sort of the...
Well, we live in the present, whether we like it or not. I mean, it's given to us. And obviously we'd be fools if we said we're not in the present. But again, our minds travel sort of leagues ahead of us or back, whichever way. We do the two simultaneously sometimes. You know very well, I mean, the typical scene that I love is the one where you're having dinner with friends and you're having a terrific moment. And you know you're having a terrific moment, and you're already logging it into the future because you say, in a month from now, I'll remember this moment as having been extremely special. But then you realize that in order for you to do that, you're actually cheating the present of what it has given you because you're already playing with it. You're trying to savor something that you're supposed to savor in the present, but you're already lodging it elsewhere, knowing that you're going to go into the future in order to retrieve it from the past. You're ruining the moment, but we do this all the time.
We do it. André, at the start of the book, in the first essay, the introduction really, you set this up, or this idea up, in very personal terms related to your own,
yes.
Well, let's call it exile, a double exile. First from Alexandria, then from Paris, where you came to America. And you talk about this very syndrome, how when you were in Alexandria, you were told that you would miss it once you'd left. So you started to begin to imagine missing it before you had left.
That's right.
Would you talk a little bit about that experience?
Well, you're basically, Proust has a wonderful moment when he says that sometimes you know that as you're stepping around the corridor, some kid is going to jump and try to scare you. So you rehearse being scared and you sort of are forewarned of the fear that you will feel, and yet you're still scared. So, and that's what I find that was special about being in Alexandria. I knew I was going to be kicked out of Alexandria. I knew I was going to miss it. And I was already thinking, I don't care about Alexandria. I never really liked it that much. I wanted to be in Paris. So I'm already anticipating being in Paris, in Alexandria. But then there's another move. I knew this, that I was going to be in Paris and I was going to miss Alexandria. And I'm missing Alexandria from Paris, even when I am in Alexandria. I don't want to make it super complex, but this is what the Irrealis mood, it is this ability to, or this defect that allows us to jump all over the place and come back to a moment in the present through the optic of the future.
And yes. Carry on.
No, but I mean, it's exactly what happens at the beginning of the book. I start by speaking about this, where we know we will be exiled, we know it's going to hurt, and so we try to rehearse the hurt that will come. Mm-hmm. And we are still hurt afterwards nonetheless, even though we are rehearsing it all along. In fact, the last year I lived in Egypt, I was constantly sort of being forewarned of the pain that I would encounter once I was out of Egypt. And that did not help at all. In fact, it ruined any ability to stay in Egypt and sort of enjoy the last vestiges of my presence there. So basically, and you can also think of it as, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to live your whole life this way? What kind of a life is that? Anyway, so that just takes us to the other dimension.
Well, let's take it to the question of art and artists who effectively dominate the book. As you said earlier, they're the sort of poles through which you sort of wrestle with these problems. So one of the first sort of double essays, there are a number of sort of two-part essays. One is Freud going to Rome, And this brings in the idea of anticipation and disappointment, particularly, a very Proustian theme, the Freud longing to see the eternal city and then being let down, having the same experience, I think, in Athens too.
Yes.
And then you bring in your own relationship with Rome.
Yeah, I do, because I mean, I used Freud, and this is one of the things I do in this book, is that I use other people in order to examine them, but in examining them to examine myself. Freud always wanted to go to Rome, but kept putting it off. In other words, he was scared of being disappointed, or he was scared of being overwhelmed. You can't tell which of the two it was. And he basically eventually got to like Rome a great deal and would always go back, even when he got to be extremely old and quite sick. He would go back to Rome, and he had his favorite hotel, which I've seen. And he also loved to visit the statue of Moses. But then I had to play with that. I decided that maybe Freud was speaking about Moses because Freud was concealing something. I was suspecting that he was concealing something, but I'm not sure that I was right. But I love the idea of doing to Freud what Freud did to his patients. What was he concealing? Well, there was another statue that I went to look for and finally saw. Um, it was very difficult to see it for some reason, and it was forbidden to see it. But I wanted to see it because Freud had seen it. I was sure he had seen it, but he never mentioned it. So I said, why is Freud not mentioning this particular statue? And in doing that, I examined myself. When was the first time that I saw that statue? Well, I had bought a postcard of it, but it was of a naked young man. And in that nudity, I knew there was something fishy about wanting to have this statue. So I covered it up with other statues. And so I had that experience come to me sort of tangentially, unexpectedly. And of course, at the same time, I was devouring Krafft Ebing. For anybody who knows Krafft Ebing, it's the most polished pornographic sort of study of sexuality that anybody has ever produced. In fact, written in language that most people could not even understand. But I was devouring it because I realized that every single malady that people had, I could easily have it myself. And I think that this is true of almost everybody in the world. So I used Freud in order to examine his desire to be in Rome, being constantly put off, and then pretending, because there's also another character in the middle of all this, Winkelmann, whom Freud only mentions once. But why would he mention it once when we know that he devoured Winkelmann, and that Winkelmann must have been the man who led him to Rome and sort of kept in his, Winkelmann was dead 2 centuries earlier, but nevertheless, he was a presence in Freud, but Freud never wanted to mention it. So you can allege all kinds of reasons behind that.
Let's talk about Rohmer, who the three essays, 3 pieces that are at the center of the book. And I didn't. Now you said that they, in a sense, generated this book. That kind of makes sense. So for the audience, Éric Rohmer, one of the great new wave French directors of the 20th century. But in a sense also original within that context. There's nobody quite like him. His greatest films, I think, were produced and released in the 70s and some in the 80s as well. And they're full of people, very intelligent, sophisticated, deluded people talking, basically, a lot of talking.
Yes.
I was, like you, I was completely obsessed with them in my adolescence, watched them over and over again. I wanted to be a character or somehow know these people and have long dinners with them talking about, destiny and love and desire. So I related to this very closely. So, but Rohmer encompasses so many of the themes. Indeed, the impossibility of the present, the curse of desire, or the blessing of desire. So talk a bit about your relationship with Rohmer, which is both personal and academic, really.
Well, the academic part does not interest me that much. I loved Rohmer because, as like you, I felt that I could easily belong in that coterie of friends that love to talk about books and love to talk about desire and love to talk about everything without doing anything. In other words, they're constantly playing with the idea of sexuality, but it's been removed from the equation. Although this is the beauty of Rohmer, is that they talk about the very removal of sexuality as they are removing it. In other words, these are not idiots. They know what they're doing. They don't need a psychologist to tell them what they've just repressed. They're not repressed at all. They're just putting it on hold. And I love this idea of these men and women who are clearly about to have sex, but don't do it right away because, or they don't do it at all in certain cases because they are putting it on hold, and they've put everything on hold. And it's as if this being on hold, which is exactly the Irrealis mood, it is precisely what drew me to them, because I have put many things on hold in my life, and I continue to do that. And it's a form of laziness or whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, there was a sense in Rohmer that he was maybe not that interested in the facts of life, in the hard facts of life, in the here and now. He was more interested in the extrapolation of the here and now into another dimension. Now, he didn't believe in the Irrealis mood. He probably never thought about it. But the question is that I saw it, or at least I wanted to see it. And the book is itself a desire to see in Beethoven, even, a sort of Irrealis penchant, just to, because that's what I saw. And I wanted to analyze what I saw without being academic, where you cannot prove what you see. I mean, an academic tries to prove what he sees or she sees, but I didn't want to be bothered with that. I just wanted to speculate, because speculation is exactly what I do best. In other words, even when I think, I am not really dealing with the here and now. I am dealing with something else. I am speculating. And I love to speculate about people who did nothing but speculate. So.
But more than that in the essays, and I think it's, the audience should be aware of this, there's a certain amount of not revelation, but disclosure about your own amorous adventures that mirrored what was happening in the movies in interesting ways. Girlfriends you were taking to see a film, and what was going on between you at the time, and how that reflected Rohmer's own themes.
It's, if you see a film with somebody that you are desiring, and the desire has not been sort of effectuated, okay? In other words, you haven't slept with that person, but you see a movie where two people are in bed together, it becomes rather awkward, because you're seeing something that you both know you're thinking about, but you won't even disclose it to one another. And I love this about Rohmer, because his characters are always sort of on the fringe of doing something that is quite bold. And in fact, putting you on the fringe sometimes is bolder than actually taking you into bed. And so I found that I was projecting my own incompetence in flirting, because I think, again, I was never quite competent as a person who sort of tries to seduce someone. But there were many girls that I was obsessed about. And one of them I took to the movies. The other one I wished I had taken to the movies. The other one I kept thinking of. And that's that sort of thing. And Rohmer was a person that was sort of gave me, as I like to say in the book, he gave me the template of how to explain the itinerary of my desires. In other words, by borrowing his itinerary, I could understand myself.
You also, there's a funny line, I can't quite remember it, but I think in terms of not having sex, you actually say that the conversation is more revealing and more interesting than sex itself in Rohmer. As one of the things he actually posits, that the characters reveal more about themselves.
Oh, absolutely. They
in that
actually
way.
confide more than you confide in sex. They are extreme. Some of them, I mean, there's a famous scene in My Nuit chez Maud where he basically, the man and the woman, man is very good Catholic. He's not going to sleep with her, but she says, there's only one bed in this house, so you're going to have to sleep with me. So he covers himself in a blanket. But before they do that, they are having the most confiding and most honest conversation about their love life. And it is amazing that they could confide so much and then put off the actual sleeping together, meant figuratively in that sense, because they had opened up. They had, in a way, already had sex verbally.
I feel there's a ghost in this book who finally appears in his full glory quite late on, and that's Proust. There are glancing references to him, but then there's a full and wonderful essay about Swann and the idea of the kiss, both Swann's first kiss with Odette, but also Marcel, the narrator of the Recherche, the very first page, which is about his desire for his mother's kiss. But I feel that the Proustian idea, Proust had this Irrealis is central to Proust's own thinking about time, that he covers it everywhere and in all parts of the novel in different ways, but you've sort of focused in on particular moments that are very telling.
Yes, I mean, there's a wonderful moment. It's not the kiss moment, because I think everybody knows that one, but it's the moment when he's looking up at the balcony, at the windows of the Swans, and he says, my God, I'd love to be invited up there one day. And in fact, he gets invited. And when he is invited there and he becomes an habitué, he's there all the time, he looks out the window at people who are guests. And he says, my God, I was one of them once upon a time. And then he says to himself, one day I will be on the outside again. And I will long for the time when I used to be inside. And it sort of reflects, this is a typical move in Proust, where he sort of boomerangs back to the present, as it were. And there's the moment with the kiss is the same thing. He's in a carriage with Odette. She sort of leans into him and he says, okay, I'm going to kiss her. This is the first time we're going to kiss for the last time. Or what is it? The last time that we're going to give each other the first kiss. And as he's about to kiss her, he holds her back for a second. He says, because I'm about to forget this moment, but I'm also saying goodbye to an Odette who hasn't been kissed yet and will never be the same again. In other words, which was better, anticipating the kiss or the actual accomplishment of the kiss? And he's totally torn, he doesn't know. And as he says to Albertine much later, when she's in bed with him, she's come to his house and throws herself on his bed, and he says, can I take a rain check? And of course, that's typical Proust. In other words, experience itself is not as interesting as the interpretation of experience.
Yes, or the looking back on the possible might have beens that
exactly.
could have happened, or things that he hasn't seen but he might imagine happening as well. André, I think you want to read a passage from one of the essays?
If we have time,
yes. I think we have a bit of time. I just want to be sure we make a space for that.
Okay, I will read a passage about me, about when I was a child. I mean, a 14-year-old, and maybe that will. I'm changing my glasses. Forgive me for a second. Okay. A picture that my father took of me is my last picture in Egypt. I was scarcely 14. In the picture, I am squinting and trying to keep my eyes open. The sun is in my face. And I'm smiling rather self-consciously because my father is chiding me and telling me to stand up straight for once, while all I'm probably thinking is that I hate this desert oasis about 20 miles from Alexandria and can't wait to get back and head to the movies. I must have known that this was the last time I'd ever see this oasis in my life. There is no other picture of me in Egypt after that one. To me, it represents the last instance of who I was 2 to 3 weeks before leaving Egypt. As I stand there in my typically reluctant, undecided posture with both hands in my pockets, I have no idea what we're doing in this desert outpost or why I'm letting my father take my picture. I can tell my father is not pleased with me. I'm trying to look like the person he thinks I should be. Stand straight, don't wince, look decisively. But this is not me. Yet now that I look at the picture, this is who I was that day. I trying to be someone else, or caught ever so awkwardly between who I didn't like being and who I was being asked to be. When I look at the black and white photo, I feel for the boy of almost 6 decades ago. What happened to him? Whatever did he end up becoming? He isn't gone. Perhaps I wish he were gone. I've been looking for you, he says. I'm always looking for you. But I never speak to him. I seldom ever think of him. Yet now that he's spoken, I've been looking for you too, I say, almost by way of a concession, as if I'm not sure I even mean what I've just said. And then it hits me. Something happened to the person I was back then in that picture, to the person staring at the father who is ordering him to stand up straight, adding, as he frequently did, a cutting "for once," as if it to make certain that his criticism landed where it hurt. And the more I look at the boy in the picture, the more I begin to realize that something separates me from the person I might have become had nothing changed, had I never left, had I had a different father, or been allowed to stay behind and become who I was meant to be, or even wanted to be. It's the person I could have become that continues to rankle in my mind, because he's right there in the picture, but ever so hidden. What happened to the person I was actually working on becoming, but didn't know I was about to become, because one never quite knows that one is indeed working on becoming anyone. I look at the black and white picture of someone over there and I'm tempted to say, this is still me, but it's not. I didn't stay me. I look at the picture of the boy posing for his father with the sun in his face, and he looks at me and asks, what have you done to me? I look at him and I ask myself, what in God's name have I done with my life? Who is this me who got cut off and never became me, the way I cut him off and never became him? He has no words of comfort. I stayed behind. You left, he says. You abandoned me. You abandoned who you were. I stayed behind, but you left. I have no answers for his questions. Why didn't you take me with you? Why did you give up so fast? I want to ask him, who of us two is real and who is not? But I know what his answer will be. Neither of us is. Neither of us.
That's beautiful, beautiful passage. Thank you, André.
Thank you, thank you.
I was thinking as I was reading the book also about how all of us at this moment are placed into a strange period of time which makes us think about time. I mean, one might argue that it's actually both an eternal present, where we've lost the future and we've lost the past, or it's no present at all because we're thinking all the time about what we've lost, what we left behind, and what's to come, and when it will come. Have you been struck by this during this period?
All of us have, and I think we think in terms of course, we think in terms of 4-year increments for obvious reasons. And think about this. 400,000 people have died, and they're gone. They're gone from, as we like to say, they're gone from our dinner table. They're gone from so many things. These were not just shadows that happened in a newspaper. They're actual people, and so basically, and what the virus has done, it's that it has forced us to step out of time. We all know, we knew at least that this was going to last a year and a half, maybe. That's what they told us. And so we put our entire lives on hold, as if what was happening was not that real anyway, because we couldn't see our friends, we couldn't have dinners out, we couldn't travel, we couldn't do so many things. So we are out of time as it is even now. Look at Powell's. I mean, this is a bookstore, the best, one of the best bookstores in the universe,
Yeah.
and it's empty. It cannot host people to come and buy things. I think they can only sell on the in mail. But so it's one of those things that our lives are on hold. But that's precisely what the Irrealist mood is. It's basically not the present. This is not the present. This is just the present on hold.
André, I think now we should move on to questions which have been
Okay.
gathering while we've been talking. We have, I'll read them out. This is a question from Roger Porter. How much is Irrealis a way to think about Hamlet and his problems?
Well, Hamlet is in fact he's the most paralyzed human being that we know. He has a mission, or at least he's entrusted by his father with a mission, with a job to do. And he can't get around to it. He's full of ambivalence and sort of indecision. He is what La Rochefoucauld was called once, irresolute. He cannot resolve anything. Even the girl that he loves, he's just basically banishes her to a nunnery. And he ends up killing her brother. And basically, if you look at the play, it is, people say it's the most perfect play. I think it's the most imperfect play. Because the action is put on hold constantly. It's all about Irrealis, if you want to. Yes, of course.
And then from John Dominy, many compliments on the book. I'd like to hear about the memoir effect that asserts itself over the course of Homo Irrealis. In the first essays you're speaking of, places and experiences of your childhood, and the last on Pessoa opens with a moving parable about growing old. Please tell us what you can about how this arrangement took hold, how the collection became more shaped.
Yes, well, I was always going to write an essay on Pessoa, who I discovered about 10 years ago, to my shame. Somebody wrote to me and said, "You sound very much like Pessoa." So I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." And then he gave me an explanation of why. And I said, yeah, he's making perfect sense. So I read Pessoa, which for 2 months I was reading him, because it's not an easy book. And it's a fantastic book. It's one of the great classics of the 20th century. If there are 4, it's there among them. And I ended the Pessoa with a mention of a painter that painted Jesus, and then 20 years later is now painting Judas, and asks a man who looks totally bedraggled and sort of says, would you like to pose? I'll pay you something. And of course, it turns out the man starts weeping and says, "Why are you weeping?" He says, "Because you painted me as Jesus when I was a boy." And so there's, age happens to you. And I liked the closing of the essay because I close it with the same picture that I read about of myself in the book. And I think, if I just may for 1 second read the final line of the essay, because it gives away the stuff. To be the irrealist, I mean, there might have been that never happened, but isn't unreal for not happening, and might still happen, though we fear it never will, and sometimes wish it won't happen, or not quite yet. I mean, everything is there in that story of the painter, and in Pessoa himself. He's constantly writing about this. Most people who write about Pessoa usually write about his multiple identities. I find that subject so boring that I can't stand it any longer. I think that Pessoa was basically a man who was not locked down in the present tense and was constantly sort of skidding from the present.
Okay, a question from Luca Di Placido. Nostalgia, is it something which drains human beings? Or instead, is it something which points out our ability to perceive such complex feelings and emotions? Is it a curse or a blessing? If you ask me, it's a blessing.
Is that you, Jonathan, or is it?
No, it's Luca.
Okay.
I'm reading that.
I don't
verbatim?
know. I put it this way. I am so confused by nostalgia that I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if it's a blessing. Uh, I mean, I envy people who will tell you that they go to work, they come home, they have dinner, everything is organized for them. They love their lives. They watch the game on Saturdays and Sundays, and they have a whole sort of retinue. They don't live in the past. They don't miss the past. No, I don't want to talk about the past. And how about the future? Do you fantasize? No, I don't want to think about the future. I envy people like that. Of course, I wouldn't want to be like them, but I envy them nonetheless because it's kind of, they're rooted in the spot. Nostalgia is basically nostalgia and fantasy are the same thing, except fantasy moves into something like the future, and nostalgia, of course, lies about the past in order to find something about the past that might have been quite wonderful, but actually wasn't that wonderful, as we all know. But you're sort of drifting back and forth. And I don't know. I mean, that's how I am. I mean, I'm never in the moment. Um, it's a fault, I'm sure, but that's how I think. That's how I feel. That's certainly how I write. I cannot write anything without positing that it has been lost.
A question from Eve Burton. How does this idea fit with concepts of the multiverse?
What is the multiverse?
Well, I believe it's the alternate realities that could be happening
Oh,
simultaneously and might actually
oh,
be
okay.
happening at the same time.
Well, if it's an alternate reality, we've had a lot of that, of the alt reality, um, which usually turns out to have been a pack of lies propagated by somebody in Washington, D.C. Uh, I, yes, I mean, we inhabit different universes all the time. I would say that 90% of our lives are spent in the might be, might have been, could still be, shouldn't be, but might. That's where we live. I think that once we accept this as a condition for life, then we might even accept the fact that everything about us is fundamentally imperfect. And the search for perfection is just a dream. It doesn't mean that we mustn't dream, but perfection is itself something that we can't even hold on to, even when we find it.
Mhm. Question from Simone Carsi. What classics would you put up alongside Pessoa?
Beside Pessoa, oh gosh, in the 20th century, I assume, I think Joyce is one, definitely. An amazing writer. Uh, Proust, of course, Pessoa, definitely in the class. And among the Italians, I would say that, what's his name? Oh God,
Svevo?
I like Svevo, but I've taught him too many times, and I've gotten tired. But the man who wrote the Leopard, I think, is probably
Lampedusa.
Lampedusa. He's an amazing writer. I think a very sophisticated to a point beyond comparison with many others. People like to call Thomas Mann a great writer. I never had the stomach for Thomas Mann. I find him sort of mirthless. Musil is another one, but I never finished reading Musil. I have to admit, I tried to read the book many times. I read the first volume, and that was a trial. So I left it at that. But
That's a good list.
that's a good list. And enough of that modernism thing. We're waiting for the 21st century to.
From Benjamin Tariri, hi Andre, you mentioned that some people perceive time as not even being real and that it may actually be a figment of our imagination. Can you please expand on that thought?
Well, if you didn't have a watch, if you didn't have a clock, if you didn't have any of those things, if you didn't measure days and months and so on, and had no names for days and for months, you'd have no concept of time. In other words, all these are basically man-made ways of mastering of putting time in a kind of thrall, to make, it's as if to own time, to manage it. And time is something that happens to us, and we can only see it as we age. I mean, that's the only proof that time is happening, is aging and seeing young people become older and older and older as we become older and yet more older. Uh, how do we experience time? We don't know how we experience time. We have invented words like past, present, and future, which is why I'm throwing in the subjunctive, the conditional, the imperative. And by the way, the Irrealis mood has about 20 other configurations, which I was told not to publish because it would confuse people. But there's all kinds of things that I love the frequentative tense or aspect in English, which is fascinating. But we create these things in order to manage the way that grammar manages our ability to speak. Without grammar, it would be a huge mess. Well, some people don't want to accept grammar anyway, and that's another issue, which is more in your line of work than mine. Uh, but it is, I mean, these are all constructions that help us manage things that are quite personal. How do we travel through time? What is the itinerary of time? What is our sort of movement in time? How does time pass through us? Does it even, and as finally, does it even exist? Which is the ultimate question that we can ask. It's almost as if some people may ask if God exists, but if you ask if time exists, that's real sort of calamity that you're asking for.
By the way, Eve Burton has defined multiverse better than I. And she says very concisely, the multiverse posits that all possibilities are true always, simultaneously, infinitely.
Yes, but that's, you know, that's lovely. And I admit it is lovely, but I don't understand it. I don't understand the coincidence of two planets having the exact number of people in it and having people like you and me doubled up, because why not? I mean, it makes perfect sense that we should have doubles somewhere on this mega universe. There has to be another Earth. There has to be another Jonathan and another Andre. It makes perfect sense, but I don't understand that sort of thing. It's the way that I cannot understand statistics. Somebody explained to me what statistics did, and I said, can you give it to me in a figurative way? He says, no, there's no such thing. You either understand statistics or you don't, and I don't understand this. I don't understand synchronicity, which is a simpler form of the multiverse. In other words, yes. Coincidence. Does coincidence have a meaning? I think it does when you look for one, but you know it doesn't.
Well, yeah. Rohmer's characters thought a lot about that.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Question from Vera Hansen. I'm reading False Papers right now. So many similar themes as with much of your work. Curious if you revisited False Papers in any way while writing this new collection.
No, I did not. I did not. Maybe I should have, but I think, to be very honest, I think that everybody, every singer, every composer, every writer, every painter has really one thing to say. They say it differently every single time, which is why you have like a million Monet paintings, whom I adore. And Beethoven's quartets, you know, they each says the same thing, but differently. And I think that I've always spoken about time in that particular way, sometimes knowingly, sometimes in camouflage, but I was always doubtful that there was such a thing as time, or that time is in fact, is how we experience or think we experience time. So yes, it's there in False Papers, it's there in Out of Egypt, it's there in everything I write, it's there in Call Me By Your Name. I mean, imagine if Elio were not thinking about the past. That would not, you would not have the book. Yeah. You wouldn't have the movie either, so.
Question from Elizabeth Prater. How has writing in different genres shaped your experience as an author? That was one of my questions too, actually. So I'm glad it was asked.
Okay, well, as I said, you're whether I'm writing memoirs, essays, novels, short stories, novellas, or whether I'm even writing a book review, you will always know it's by me. I think you can tell it's by me because there's a particular sort of nuance of you look for paradox and ambiguity in everything I write. And that is basically my signature. As long as I can give you the paradox of a situation, the contradiction that is deep-seated, not just a frivolous, superficial contradiction, but the one that articulates the whole experience of a particular moment or of a particular book, of a particular piece of music. You always look for contradictions, and I look for that. And I cannot resolve them because even the composers or the writers or the thinkers could not resolve them. But they basically inhabited them, and they inhabit me as well. I can go on forever on that subject. But I never know when I start writing something, sometimes, whether it's a novel or whether it's going to be a piece of memoir or whether it's going to turn into an essay. I don't know. And I like the fact that I am having difficulty figuring out which genre it will ultimately belong to. One of my favorite essays, which is in Alibis, is called Lavender. And as I was writing it, I had no idea what I was going to do with lavender. I just thought that my father had a bottle of lavender and that he used it as an aftershave, and that it defined probably my whole life. A stupid bottle defining your life does not make sense, but it does. And as you excavate and look for paradoxes throughout my experience with a simple bottle of lavender water, um, just generated that essay, which took a long time to write because I was abandoning it all the time. I can't go on writing this. This is too difficult.
Um, I have one final question, Andre, which is what are you writing next? Do you have any sense? Have you already started? Or do you not know
No,
what it is
actually,
yet?
I don't know what it is. I think I want to write about my father, who was a very unusual man, a very, very unusual man, extremely open-minded and tolerant of so many things, and at the same time, a staunch, what you might call conservative in his manners, but not in his ethics. And he, of course, is the model for the father in Call Me By Your Name, a man who's entirely sort of flexible on so many things, and yet at the same time stand straight. Don't eat this way, and do not, as he used to tell me, never give your hand to a lady before she extends her hand to you first. Things like that, you wouldn't hear about them today, but he was full of that. And you had to play by those rules, but at the same time, extremely open, himself leading a rather very open life.
So probably a memoir, but perhaps a novel, or
We'll see. We'll see. I
we'll
have no
see.
idea.
I'm mindful of time, so I think we have to wrap up, but it's been a joy to talk to you, Andre.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much. Really, thank you. Thank you. And thank
here's
you,
Brie.
Powell's, for hosting us.
Miles.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, both to Andre and Jonathan, for joining us tonight. I can see some of the comments in the Q&A field just thanking both of you, a lot of gratitude. I think that everyone watching sort of needed this time to go deep into writing and process and this book. So thank you very much for joining us and being here. André Aciman's new book is Homo Irrealis, and you can purchase it at powells.com or your local independent bookstore. Thank you very much, André, Jonathan, for joining us.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andre.